My name is Tanisha, and my partner is Pargiv. We are going to be talking about the first book, Criminology, by Stephen E. Barkin on Chapter 10, Violent Crime, Homicide, Assault, and Robbery. I want to begin this discussion by asking, what is the focus of this chapter? The focus of this chapter is interpersonal violence, which is the threat, attempt, or actual use of physical force by one or more persons that results in physical or non-physical harm to one or more persons. What is the first type of interpersonal violence, and what are its patterns and social dynamics? The first type of interpersonal violence is homicide, which is popular due to the presence of a corpse. According to the FBI's list of Part 1 crimes in the UCR, it begins with murder and non-negligent manslaughter. This is defined as the willful killing of one human being by another and excludes deaths caused by gross negligence, suicide, and justifiable homicide. Murder and non-negligent manslaughter is divided into 4 subcategories. First-degree murder, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, and involuntary manslaughter. Now for the patterns and social dynamics. African Americans comprise only about 13% of the U.S. population, but about half of offenders and victims are African Americans. Homicide is mostly an intraracial.
Continue, please.
Homicide is mostly an intraracial crime, meaning they're mostly committing crimes against each other, their own race. 86% of white murder victims are murdered by white offenders. 92% of African Americans are murdered by African American offenders. Homicide is a masculine trait in which men are likely to murder and be murdered. How is assault different from homicide? The UCR defines assault as aggravated assaults and simple assaults. The major difference between the two is whether the victim dies. Aggravated assault is an unlawful attack of a person or someone else with the intent of inflicting severe or aggravated bodily harm. Simple assault is an assault where no weapon is used and no serious injury has occurred. Name some of the trends in U.S. homicide rates. 1. The U.S. homicide rates rose after the mid-1960s into the 1970s, before declining after 1980 and rising again after 1985 into the early 1990s. 2. Beginning in the early 2000s, homicide rates began to level. 3. The post-1985 homicide rise came from an increase in homicide by and against males in urban areas from factors such as growing sense of despair from declining economic opportunities in urban areas, 2. Increase in drug trafficking, and increase in possession and use of powerful guns. What are the explanations for homicide and aggravated assault? Well, the first explanation is the U.S. has more inequality than any other industrial nation, and studies have shown that homicide is higher in nations with greater economic inequality. Also, there is a higher rate for handgun ownership compared to European nations. Historically, the U.S. has a high rate of serious violence, so this may be another reason for high homicide rates. Social disorganization and anomic strain theories can also explain homicide and aggravated assaults, especially in urban areas. There's a population density, depopulated living conditions, weak social conditions, and concentrated disadvantages of urban neighborhoods, which all in all contributes to high violence rates. Men commit almost all homicides and aggravated assaults because poverty interacts with masculinity. Men at the lower socioeconomic status are more likely to engage in opposition masculinity that involves physical competition, violence, and drinking. Things like insults and slights are seen as major offenses to men that are dealt with in violent responses. Therefore, confrontational homicides are committed. As stated before, most African Americans are victims and offenders of homicides and aggravated assaults. There are 4 non-racist explanations for aggravated assault violent crime rates that emphasize certain criminogenic, structural, and ecological factors. 1. Anger and frustration arising from racial discrimination and economic deprivation. 2. The stress, social disorganization, and other criminogenic conditions that are especially severe in urban neighborhoods with the multiple problems social scientists call concentrated disadvantage. 3. Negative family and school experiences. And lastly, the influence of deviant peers and the code of the streets that's common in these areas. Now I'll pass it on to my partner, Pargiv.
Hi guys, my name is Parkiv, and I'm going to be discussing the second part of this. Let me just hand the camera to my partner. So, as she addressed the first part, I'm going to go ahead and address the second part, which is I'm going to ask some questions and then address those topics. For example, what is the reason for violence by women? Women's violence comes from the same reasons and the roots of their male counterparts. It is due to extreme poverty, negative family and school experiences, and growing up in overall a rough neighborhood. Same as men. Usually when women react to violence, it involves the aid of a brother, an uncle, or a cousin. In the cases of women committing homicide, the victims are usually men who have been battering them. Another good question is, what is the cause of robbery and what are some of the statistics of it? First off, robbery is when someone tries to take something of value away from someone else with the force of violence or using force or by using fear. As the book discusses, robbery is mainly a young person's crime, usually committed by people under the age of 25. This age, 0 to 25, accounts for 2/3 of all robbery arrests. Statistics show that the more people live in a city, the more the robbery rate is, as opposed to rural countries, where crime is not too high. According to the FBI, men commit 88% of all robberies arrests. In 2009, and African Americans comprise of 55% of arrests, according to John Cochran. There are several types of robberies. First type is professional, and professional robberies comprise of when people get together, plan out the crimes carefully, and the robbery usually involves a big organization with big rewards in it for them. The second type of robbery is opportunist robber, and that person only commits that crime when the opportunity presents itself. The third type of robbery is an addicted robber, and this person will rob to get money for his drugs because he's addicted. Lastly, there is the alcoholic robber, and this type of person usually robs when they're under the influence of alcohol, and the reason for it is usually to buy more alcohol. Robbery is mainly done for two main reasons. One is for economic gain, and the other one is for thrills and other reasons. Another great question a lot of people ask is, what are some of the special topics in violent crimes? Well, different types of violence, there are different types of violence, mass murder, serial killings, workplace violence, and hate crimes, and even child abuse. And even the question of mass media and violence, also guns and gun control. Mass murder and serial killings are examples of multiple mass murder or called multi-site, and account for less than 3% of all homicides. Mass murder is when somebody takes multiple lives at once or within a start and stop period of a time. Serial killings are when someone takes lives but are at one time or over. It's usually at one time or over a period of time, usually years, maybe months, sometimes days. So to carry on with workplace violence, and it goes on even today. The statistics show that people working as law enforcement officers are most at risk for workplace violence. A study from the NCVS shows that workplace violence accounts for 18% of all violent victimizations. Another special topic in violent crimes includes hate crimes. Hate crimes are committed to individuals or groups because of their race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, disability, or sexual orientation. According to the UCR, racial bias motivate 51% of all incidents, and 17.5% was motivated by religion bias, with 17.7% motivated by sexual orientation. There is two types of violence towards children, physical and sexual. Both are known as child abuse. The government doesn't know the amount of times this happens because children usually don't report these crimes. Some controversial topics are that some blame the mass media for violence, but it shows that it is difficult to prove. Another is about guns and gun control. While many believe that gun control would make people's lives easier, will make people easier victims. Another interesting topic that we're going to cover is, what does history tell us? History shows that in the past, violence was more in Europe, but the US is the most violent country currently. This cause is economic deprivation, racial discrimination, abusive parenting, criminogenic urban conditions as well. Thank you very much, and would like to end by saying our names one more time.
Denisha.
And my name is Poyev.